So no reason not to start. Concreto Lab, well, already introduced by Irene, a review of guidelines for the conservation of concrete. I hope not to disappoint you because there's not a lot of review in it, but I will explain why that is not the case. I will set a bit of the context of Docomomo a bit further than Irene already has done, and what we have done in the Concreto Lab, resulting in the Concreto Codebook, which is a physical thing here at my desk, but also a digital PDF around on the internet. But well, without further ado, let's go on. If you have any questions, no, I can't follow the chat at this moment, but feel free to post some stuff in the chat, and I'll try to get back to that when finalizing the presentation. This is what it is about, right? So from demolishment to rehabilitation. That's not only my thing, I think, and I hope that's, well, what brings us all together here in this Concreto Academy. That is the starting point. It was the starting point. It's not specifically for a reason, Elisabeth, that I used the Belgium example of a demolishment of a concrete building, but I just happen to have this very nice image here. From demolishment to rehabilitation, towards Concreto guidelines to empower the green rehabilitation of European concrete architecture. And I think this is what I've been looking to in this presentation. So that's the underlying idea of this presentation. What should or what could be in that, and that's also my question to all of you. What should be, or what do you think that could be or should be in Concreto guidelines, without you knowing what the aim of that is or what it should be? And as my note there, this slide will also be my final slide. So you have 20 minutes or 30 minutes to think about that, and then let's see if we can start a discussion on that and collect some input from your side. But now on Docomomo International, for the ones, and I have to shift something to the side. So Docomomo International is a non-profit organization dedicated to documentation and conservation of building sites and neighborhoods of the modern movement. And established in 1988, I'm the Secretary General, and Uta Potgieser, also here on this slide, is the chair, the president of Docomomo International. We are housed, our headquarters is here in Delft, or here, I am physically in Delft, at TU Delft, where we lead or try to lead this international group. In Docomomo, in Concreto, we have worked together with Andrea Canziani and Camilla Repetti that were instrumental in bringing the Concreto Codebook together. And also I have to accredit Elisabetta and Svenja, who did in the first stages some research into the Concreto Codebook. Docomomo International, some advertisement, of course. We run a website, docomomo.com, and a international academic peer-reviewed journal. So if you are interested in publishing related to modern movement architecture now or in the near future, or you're just interested in a lot of context, a lot of background, please visit both those websites, because the docomomo.com presents all the biannual conferences or the proceedings of the biannual conferences. So thousands of pages on modern movement architecture, its history, its rehabilitation, its conservation, and whatever you could think of. And the journal website hosts, where are we, number 74, all 74 issues of the journal are also online, open access, available to you, but actually to the whole world. So please make use of it. There's quite well a search engine. So if you are looking for something, please use it. And then the next question, why is Docomomo in Concreto? Well, there's two main reasons for that. And the first one lies in the Eindhoven Seal statement. that one of the aims of Docomomo is to bring the significance of the architecture of the modern movement to the attention of the public, the authorities, and all other stakeholders. And we also try to foster and disseminate the development of appropriate techniques and methods of conservation and adaptive reuse. And that's exactly fits perfectly in the aims of CONCRETO. Besides that, a few years ago, Docomomo launched a manifesto on education, where also Docomomo states, and you see on the picture Andrea Canziani announcing this manifesto, having a focus on sharing knowledge, educating professionals, educating the younger generation, educating the public at large. So two big and main and important reasons for us to join this wonderful CONCRETO project. And to give you a bit of a further insight on Docomomo, Docomomo was established in 1988, and the main and direct reason for that was the Zonnestraal Sanatorium here in the Netherlands in Hilversum, a concrete building from the 1920s, which was that far degraded in the 1980s that everybody related to heritage protection, of course, was with his hands in his hair. Oh my God, what to do about it? Because we know more or less what to do with historic brickwork. We know more or less what to do with historic stone constructions and all these traditional materials. But back in this 1980s, no one really knew how to deal with steel window frames, float glass, concrete, modern plasterwork, etc., etc. And that was and still is the main driver for Docomomo to be. And already, I think this the fair face of concrete, the date is on it, 1997, one of the first conferences and publications on the conservation of concrete in the context of Docomomo. So now back to this almost famous code book, which was for the CONCRETO lab, the first phase. Desk research, some questionnaires to state or to define the state of the art regarding concrete conservation. And well, there's the DOI. You can follow up and find this booklet. And I have to say, it's not a disclaimer, but it's actually promoting also this annotated bibliography published by the Getty Conservation Institute, which already reached its second edition. Those two are complementary, so we did not try to double the work that has already been done in the annotated bibliography by the Getty. So please read them next to each other and add them on top of each other to get even a bigger picture of what literature, what research, what organizations, what standards and norms are around on concrete conservation. Well, let's say a kind of a popular version of the conclusions or a elaborated version of the conclusions that we were able to draw from the research that is put down in the code book is that, and you might say those are open doors, but I think it's still very important to state those, that concrete is not yet an accepted heritage material, like natural stone, like wood, like, well, whatever historic material you and many other people think about. We also noticed, and also because you are in this session and in this academy, concrete conservation is a growing field of knowledge and expertise. We also noted that knowledge and expertise in concrete conservation is very much fragmented. So there's a lot of information, there's a lot of people working in the broader field of concrete conservation, but it's really dispersed all over Europe, all over the world. And the fourth one is a very important one. We meet everywhere, or almost everywhere, a lot of enthusiasm. We meet a lot of ambition and willingness to contribute to the rehabilitation of concrete architecture in general and preservation, probably in more particular. So this is those four are the starting points, or actually substantiated what already was drawn or hypothesized in the project proposal of CONCRETO Academy. Those are very important, although generic or general statements, but it's the basis of the further work. As you know, and that I'm quite sure Irene presented that the previous hour, the goal or the main theme, the main title of CONCRETO Academy is empowering the green rehabilitation of European concrete architecture. And if I think of that, and when I talk about that with others, either professionals or the public at large, how could we in the future measure? I'm not saying we should measure, but how can we measure whether we definitely empowered the green rehabilitation? I would say that we could do that, or we should do that, through increasing the number of rehabilitated concrete buildings. So instead of only 1 a year, 10 a year, or the number you think of. And on the other hand, in parallel, increasing the quality of rehabilitation of concrete buildings, whatever we define quality, but more about that later. So a bigger number, a larger number of concrete buildings rehabilitated, and increased quality of rehabilitation. And one of the pillars stated in the aims of CONCRETO Academy is the development of guidelines and standards. So more on that. So how do guidelines or standards contribute to increasing the number and increasing the quality of rehabilitated concrete buildings, or how could do this? So in other words, how should CONCRETO guidelines look like? I'm not a native English speaking or writing person, so but I noticed in my academic life that linguistics are very important, and I know I'm amongst Turkish, Italian, and Spanish, and even other nationalities. So thinking about what a guideline is, or what a guideline could be, or what is a norm, what is a framework, what is a rule, what is a standard, I'm not so much in defining, but I think it's good to think about that and to browse through some of those definitions. And I took this from the Cambridge Dictionary, and I just underlined a few of those words. I think a guideline, what really inspired me here is that a guideline, according to the dictionary, is intended to advise people. So instead of a norm or a rule, something should be done like this. Huh? And what is in the norm, or the definition of norm, it's about a way of behaving. I really like this. So it's not you should do this, but you should act within this framework. And then I already go to the next definition, which is a system of rules or standards or norms, ideas and beliefs. So here already it becomes, cultural, ethical, because we're talking about ideas and beliefs. And that's exactly what within CONCRETO Academy you can and should exchange. So it's not only and always about knowledge, it's also about bringing the culture, our background, our beliefs, our thoughts, our behavior into it. So that about guidelines. Now I go back to the CONCRETO codebook. There's this graph is taken from the codebook, and it gives a bit of an idea, although statistically probably not completely 100% correct, but it's interesting to see, following the gray line, more or less, with the maximum at 44 right in the middle of the screen, where we see that around the year 2000, 2004, and further on this period in the early 21st century, a lot of industry standards came about. Why? How? When? Very difficult, related to concrete conservation, right? So this I'm all talking about in the context of concrete conservation. One might argue that that has to do with all the preparatory work in the whole 20th century, up to the 1980s, where quite some institutions were established, conferences were started, which is more or less the orange line, and that in the end materialized in the early 21st century in quite some norms, standards related to concrete conservation. And whether it is a reaction to that or whether it is a parallel development, I'm not sure to tell. But you see the purple line, which really grows up to 66 noted publications in the period 2020-24. So there's really a growing interest academically into concrete conservation. So all those numbers, I think, give a very good basis and underpinning of not only the necessity to focus on concrete conservation at large, but also illustrate that there is quite some momentum at this moment in the 2026 there is momentum. Quite some knowledge has been gained. A lot of conferences and organizations have matured. Many industry standards are out there. So the question is, what's next? In the CONCRETO codebook, in one of the appendices in the end, we collected the industry standards that we could find through regular literature study, browsing through the indices, finding or searching for concrete in every kind of synonym. I will not explain you the methodology here, but just trust me that we did our best to find everything. But also trust me that definitely we didn't find everything, right? So we collected industry standards around diagnostic techniques and intervention techniques. And we made the differentiation between standards, so the official rules, and some guides and guidelines around. And I have to say that we mainly focused on the internationally available guides, guidelines, and standards, and not so much dived into the specific Dutch regulation or the Italian regulation or the Chinese or the whatever national standards. And you can imagine that that has a reason of just me and us not understanding and not knowing the ways how to collect those and how to find those. So always when reading through, when browsing through, put that in the perspective of European context. And I just got some excerpts of that, and I want to challenge you to read along, just read some words, and then already after half a minute you conclude, or at least I conclude, oh my God, this is specific. Products and systems for the protection and repair of concrete structures, definitions. Structural concrete, reinforced concrete, seismic assessment, life cycle management, testing hardened concrete. So my conclusion, our conclusion is actually what is in the industry standards is very, very detailed and very, very specific. You can open one and you can read through, and I'm not discussing and not doubting the content, but it's mainly focused on a very narrow and very specific element of concrete conservation. Most of those industry standards, and that's of course for a reason, have to do with safety, with structural safety or safety of workers, working environments, because that's something that we just have to comply with in order to work safe, not only as a worker, but also create a safe building or make a safe environment. Topic-wise, I've just listed them, and I did not a statistical analysis on that, but if you just put them next to each other, then you would see that a lot of those industry standards have to deal with the strength of new concrete. So a lot of the industry standards, yes, have to do with concrete, but do not have to do specifically with rehabilitation, with repair or conservation. It's just the strength of new concrete. and how to achieve a certain strength, how to assure the quality, which components, which ingredients to use, etc. Another bunch of documents is on protection and repair. How to protect reinforcement bars, how to repair degraded concrete, and mainly I have to say from a structural point of view. Quality control of the ingredients, so what additives, what aggregates, small aggregates, large aggregates, how to define what is a small aggregate, what is a large aggregate, etc. And another bunch of documents has to do with test methods. Test methods on quality, durability, state of degradation, carbonation, etc. And there's another group dealing with reinforcement. For a large part, steel reinforcement also, but recent documents also focus on other kinds of fibers to be added as reinforcement to enlarge the tensile strength of concrete. So that's what's mainly in it. So in terms of analysis and the promise of this talk, this is my analysis of what is in the industry standards. If you state what is in it, and when I started looking at it, then of course also one can conclude what is not in the industry standards. And this has mainly to do with my expectations, right? Because there's also nothing about clothing in those standards, but that's not what I expected. There's really a lack of holistic approaches. So it's all very detailed and specific, but the bigger picture is not in those standards and guidelines. I have to say, I hope I'll try to be enthusiastic in this talk, but enthusiasm is not something you will find back in standards and industry standards and guidelines. It's very liability oriented. You have to do it like this, otherwise this or that. So enthusiasm is something which really lacking in industry standards, which I think they could benefit from if it was there. Aesthetics is also something that I barely find back in the industry standards that we collected. And in that perspective, also historic concrete and historic ingredients, not a lot to find. And in that line, also cultural value. So those two more or less go together. That is not very hard to find in the guidelines and the standards that we have looked at. Are there other documents? Yes, of course, there are many other documents, and then I go a step higher to a higher level of abstraction, going more to doctrinal documents, and I hope, or actually expect that some of you at least are familiar with those documents. I don't know whether they were mentioned already by Irene in the introduction, but otherwise they'll come to the floor later on. And we have two, not guiding document, but two documents that saw the daylight the past 10 years, specifically focusing on the conservation of 20th century cultural heritage, the Madrid New Delhi document from 2017, and a document which goes forward on this line of thinking, the Cadiz document, the guidelines for conservation of concrete heritage. And those doctrinal documents are specific to modern 20th century heritage, and the Cadiz even more specific on concrete buildings, concrete heritage. And they shape a line, or they fall in a line. And I took this timeline from another document indicating the Athens Charter, the Venice Charter, the Borough Charter. So these documents, and I really recommend you to browse once through it, not to live to the letter, but to really see how the thinking about conservation in general changed over the 20th century, how much we were able to be more specific in writing how we think we should deal with 20th century buildings and building materials. Of course, a lot of things are not in this line, but I think this gives a nice overview and an important overview of doctrinal documents. So the norms and the industry standards on the one hand that are very specific, not so much oriented at historic materials on the one hand, and the doctrinal documents that are rather abstract, but sometimes very specific on conservation and even specific on conservation of modern buildings and concrete buildings. How to bring those together and how to see where there is an overlap, where the challenges are, etc., etc. Just allow me to give you an example from the Netherlands, and I'm not going into the history of the Netherlands, but in a certain area of the Netherlands, right after the Second World War in the late 1940s, early 1950s, the Noordoostpolder, a newly reclaimed land. A lot of barns were built out of precast concrete. And on the left, you see an image with a traditionally built brickwork house next to this precast concrete elements, a barn. And on the right, you see some drawings of that. Is it a special building? Is it, well, probably not. But from a cultural historical perspective, those buildings, the ensembles of those buildings are very important because they were instrumental in developing the Noordoostpolder in that time. So, whether you believe me or not, those barns are valuable, have a high cultural historical value, and they are of concrete. So just let's dive into it. This is a drawing from 1950 on the precast concrete elements of the, and don't worry, I'll show you a zoomed in version on the next slide. But just to give you an overview of a typical architectural drawing, production drawing of a vertical section and a horizontal section of those precast concrete elements in the facade of this barn. When we take a closer look, and in yellow I have circled the dimensions. This is a very hard and dense precast concrete. I will not get into the production details, but this middle post of the concrete element is only 80 times 60 millimeters. So very, very slender, very, very small. And you see already in the drawing that there are also reinforcement bars into it. If this building is up for renovation, restoration, rehabilitation, whatever term you choose, and this middle post, for example, is degraded in such a way that the reinforcement bar, for example, is corroding, then how to repair it? When I go back to the standards, the industry standards, it perfectly prescribes how to do that, to cut away the concrete, to clean the reinforcement bar, to use a kind of chemical to stop the corroding, well, whatever. All products are defined, but the norms and the products all say that you need to have a concrete cover of 20-25 millimeters at least. Well, now, please start calculating and look at the drawing. This reinforcement bar is only 10-15 millimeters away from the surface. So I cannot, whether I would like it or not, repair this with a concrete cover of 25 millimeter or even 15 millimeters. I don't have the solution here, but currently those elements are being repaired. They do not fall under the current standards and current norms. So we need to discuss how to define quality of repair here without or even with industry standards when we are not able to reach the, in this case, concrete covers that are in the regular technical prescriptions to repair concrete. So when cultural historical value is at stake, we get a different playing field. So then it's about how to define quality. And going back to the aim or one of the aims of empowering ourselves, how to increase quality in conservation beyond actual technical prescriptions, norms, and beyond conceptual, doctrinal starting points. And therefore, I dived into a very interesting report that was done in the Netherlands already 10 years ago or 12 years ago, but it doesn't change its context, on restoration quality in the European perspective, where an inventory was made of how do different countries deal or define restoration quality. So now I'm independent again from concrete. So I'm looking at concrete in conservation or restoration in general in the European perspective. Well, European in this case meant Norway, Ireland, the UK, Italy, Switzerland. Well, you can read the map. So the European perspective, and it's very funny when I read this document twice. There's a lot of data in it based on questionnaires that were sent out. There was a seminar where people were presenting, and actually looking at the same data, one can tell two completely different stories. It's just how to present the data. So if we compare those European countries, I'm quite sure if there were a dozen other countries next to it, those data and the conclusions were more or less the same. Every country is different because of its legal framework regarding heritage buildings and its building traditions. So we can easily argue that we cannot compare the Netherlands to Poland, that we cannot compare Turkey to Italy or Italy to Spain or whatever, because of a different legal framework, because of different building traditions, etc., etc. But another conclusion we can draw from the same data is that all countries are the same. As there are monument owners, there are legal bodies that keep an eye on preservation, and there are craftsmen actually executing the conservation work. And so both are completely true. So it's a matter of what do you emphasize? Do you want to emphasize the difference, or do you want to emphasize on what is the same? And of course, the last right, everybody from every country, and I assume even you here in this digital room know success stories and horror stories. So that's not that's out of the question. What was debated in this document, and I think which is all still valid, there's always a discussion or the tension between a top-down kind of control. So as a legal body, do I want to, do I need to, am I able to prescribe to monument owners, building owners, to conservators to do this and that, and not do that and that? Or do we need to leave that to the market, to the free market? The many countries are quite liberal, or in any case regarding adaptive reuse and preservation. The market should solve, and the market is able to solve all questions. There's a lot of experts, there's a lot of expertise, so the market should be able to solve every question. But that brings a tension, a top-down control way and a bottom-up free market way. And therefore, this document concludes, and I completely agree with that, when we're talking about guidelines, we need to focus on the complete column with all stakeholders. It does not make sense to make guidelines when they are not prescribed and or when they are not used. When a guideline is there, but no one says, hey, you should use it because it's something good, then it doesn't work. If something prescribes it and something says, yeah, it's really good, you should use it, but it's not used, it's also not working. If it is badly described and somebody is using it, then you still get shitty quality. So the whole circle, the whole column needs to be involved. And therefore, there should be a focus on a common language. That's not only linguistic, but it also has to do with how do we translate the traditional heritage vocabulary into something that is understandable by young professionals, by the old professionals, by building owners, by people who execute it, etc., etc. And this document also concludes, and I think I agree, there should be a focus on training individuals and accrediting companies. There are some some countries that not only train individuals, but also certify individuals. When that's done, you always relate or you're always depending on certain individuals, and the knowledge transfer is closed into these individuals. So I'm really in favor of training individuals and accrediting companies. That makes also the individuals mobile. They can go to other companies, export their knowledge and exchange their knowledge with other companies to grow again the whole column of stakeholders. The European perspective. Well, as you might know by now, I'm Dutch, so I know a bit more about the Dutch context than about the Polish context or the Chinese context or the Ecuadorian context. So that's why I took the Dutch one. So this was taken up from 2010 onwards in the Netherlands. How to improve conservation, quality in general. So again, I'm not talking about concrete in particular, but in general terms. I think in hindsight, right? So looking back now over the past 15 to 20 years, there was a big move made from emphasizing reversibility, resulting from the Venice Charter in 1964, that every intervention should be able to be reversed to its previous state, which in the end seemed almost impossible to reach, to compatibility. An intervention should not harm the existing. And retreatability. If I do this once, can I redo that in 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now? So thinking about what implies compatibility, what means compatibility, and what is or what could be retreatability. The minimal intervention, I think it officially originates in the Carta del Restauro. Do as much as needed and as little as possible, which is a perfect sentence, and you can start every discussion with that, and everybody agrees. But what is it? It's not concrete. As much as needed, as little as possible. If I have a discussion with an owner of a building, he or she would say, yeah, but this is really necessary. That if I would talk to a specialist who is trained as a preservationist and doesn't want to touch historic fabric, he would say, no, that's not necessary. It's as little as possible. So how do we operationalize this? Focus on solidity or durability. If I make an intervention, how long will it stand? If I have to choose between the one and the other, does this one stand longer than the other? Focus on guidelines on the where process and product are in it, and the certification of content. And in the Netherlands, that materialized in this in a way stupid image, but a very nice one, because it's used all over the place. It's called the restauratieladder in Dutch, literally translated the conservation ladder, which actually says that we all should aim first to conserve and maintain buildings, elements, materials. If that is not possible, then make the next step to repair it. If we cannot, repair it, then we have to renew or reconstruct that. And when we're starting to renew or reconstruct, we have kind of three options: copy the exact the same as it was, imitate it, or improve it. And this is probably quite an academic approach of conservation. But the funny thing is that this image pops up now with all contractors that are certified via the system of conservation, and they all know what we're talking about. So that gives a conversation starter, and we can talk about, hey, but no, this is beyond repair, so we need to renew it. Okay, if we need to renew it, do we copy it exactly the same? No, it should not be exactly the same. Well, etc. So it's a very good and nice conversation starter. That's exactly what I implied in the previous slide with creating a common language. Now back to concrete architecture. I have 3 or 4 more slides. Rehabilitation of concrete architecture, which we are here for in CONCRETO Academy. Rehabilitation of concrete architecture really goes beyond preservation of historic concrete. Let's be honest. It's not about only the material, it's also about the buildings, or probably it's even more about the buildings and less about the material. So I leave that open for discussion. I think that rehabilitation of concrete architecture is at the crossing of maintenance, adaptive reuse, and preservation. So it's not only preserving the material there is, it's not only changing a function of a building, it's also about maintaining a building, maintaining its function, etc., etc. I think what concrete, or the rehabilitation of concrete architecture in general, sets it apart from other materials or other types of buildings is the important role for structural engineers, because concrete is such a difficult and multi-dimensional materials that we really need. I talk from a design perspective, I'm sorry, so that designers need engineers, need structural engineers to really think beyond the basics. And one of the most important notices in the first, most buildings we need in the coming decades are already built. And so what do we need to do? We need to take care of what is already there. We better do that in a right way because of environmental reasons, because of cultural, historical reasons, because of it's just fun, whatever. And that's why people who saw me presenting earlier, I really like this idea. Think about 100% heritage. There are only a few handful of buildings made out of concrete that are listed as monuments. Probably in Germany a bit more than in Spain, or the other way around, it doesn't matter. But it's far less than buildings made of traditional materials. But should we, as community, wait until a building is listed as a monument to treat it as heritage? It was still given through previous generations to us to deal with that. And I would call that, and then I get back to the Docomomo perspective, a modern movement. I think we need this modern movement, and we can talk about avant-garde or not. We need this modern movement, and I think, I hope, I expect we are already there, where we think about 100% heritage. So when we go to CONCRETO guidelines, and we are on our way, I think we should really make use of the global momentum. Concrete has a momentum because of environmental reasons. This 100% heritage thinking goes beyond only this meeting already. Grow wide enthusiasm. So not only point at norms and standards which should be done or should not be done, focus on enthusiasm. Target building owners, investors, and policymakers, because those are the ones in the end making decisions on adaptive reuse or preservation. I think it's very easy, and not only in this context, we need to mediate the half full thinkers and the glass is half empty thinkers. We can really say, no, this building is beyond repair. It's impossible. Let's just demolish it. Or there are people who say, I see a lot of, although challenges, but I see a lot of opportunities. And I think there it's very important thinking about guidelines. How do we mediate between those two approaches? Nurture design thinking and the hands-on mentality, exactly in the core of CONCRETO Academy. Bridge the traditional or the classical conservator who only uses, I'm exaggerating of course, a microscope and works through a microscope to solve a certain issue, and the builder on the other hand who says, I'll just solve it. That is something that needs to be bridged. And education and knowledge exchange, again, in the center, in the middle of CONCRETO Academy is important. So my advice to us all is depart from the doctrinal documents, embrace existing norms, and focus on defining what good quality concrete conservation is in a wide perspective. Brings me back to the final slide, as I promised. This is really my final slides. What are your thoughts about this? Thank you.